Dink. 1, 2, 3, 5 minute beep up. Excuse me. Oh, welcome to the sesquicentennial episode of Wednesday I'm in Love with your host, James Calloway. Hi, that's me. Oh, I'm off tomorrow, so I'm having a cup of coffee at 7 p.m. This is how we party on a Wednesday night. Now I can stay up and I'm going to attempt to watch Get Back. Not the entire thing, God knows, but I've been on a real TV kick lately. It's another reason I have been getting through more comics lately, just by, catching it as a catch can. Now you don't want to hear my words. Excuse me. But yeah, I am off tomorrow, so cheers, big ears. I can stay up past 9:30 if I feel like it. All right then. First up on Picks of the Week. Well, let's see, where am I going to go? I'll start with this one. Oh, you know what? I didn't even see who this was by. Oh, I really didn't want to have to do this. Oh, right. Okay. First up is Lord of the Jungle, #1 from the good people at Dynamite. This is actually second or third Tarzan series that they have done, and I believe the reason it's called just Lord of the Jungle is because they were unable to get the rights from the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate for the name Tarzan. So they're just going to write... Dan Jurgens is writing it, and I kind of bought this book in spite of Dan Jurgens. Dan Jurgens has been... He's got a grand career. He's a fan-favorite Superman writer, which he wrote for years. I believe he wrote The Death of Superman, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But along those same lines, like when I was a kid, I didn't read that much Superman back then. I was way more a Marvel guy, just in general. Yeah. And recently, this would have been in July, I was watching the shop all by my little self because everybody else was at Comic-Con. And so I went to the quarter bin and I grabbed a bunch of funny books out of there, a lot of DC stuff, a lot of stuff I wouldn't normally read or own. And so I was reading a lot of that. And boy, I don't like Jurgens Superman stuff that much. The Death of Superman, again, like I say, I'll get to that, but that holds up pretty well, surprisingly enough, because that was such a circus. But Jurgens is still a good writer. I just remember texting my friend Frank and being like, "Did you remember how boring these Superman stories are?" And I'm talking from like the late 80s, maybe 1990. But I really do like Tarzan. I've only read the first book, but I bought a few years back for my Kindle a collection of every Tarzan novel, of which there's like 50 or 60, I want to say. And it was $1. So I said, yeah, give it to me. And Tarzan comics in general are always really fun. The last one that I really liked was by Arvid Nelson. And I don't remember how now, but the thing I liked about Nelson's run was there's a big, with this sort of stuff, with any of this shit, you have to suspend disbelief, and sometimes extremely high. You really suspend it up there. And I'm fine with that. But, there's certain things that are just... So I don't know how familiar you are with the origin of Tarzan. I mean, I'm sure everybody kind of has a general idea. But his parents, the Greystokes, I think actually she was pregnant with him. I don't know why you took a pregnant lady on a safari, but yeah, they crash landed on a beach of Africa and they all died except for the baby. And for the first 5 years, I want to say, he might have been a toddler. The thing that, okay, so I can believe that a child, even a toddler, much less an infant, can survive by him or herself in the jungles of Africa, and that a gorilla is going to come along and adopt him and raise him as one of her own. I can buy all that. He teaches himself to read and speak English in that time. And I was like, what? There was like a baby book in his belongings, right? He brought it on the trip. He's like, I'm going to read this on the plane. So it was like an ABC book. And somehow he learns to speak English from that. It might not seem super obvious, but it leapt out at me. I was like, he's never heard English. He can read it. I can buy that. If he could teach himself to read with a baby book, not very plausible, but to speak it, that really bothered me. But Arvin Nelson wrote, and I can't remember what it is now, he wrote a thing into his run kind of explaining that away, and I was like, thank you, finally. Edgar Rice Burroughs is a writer I'd like to read more of. I've never read any John Carter stuff, Warlord of Mars. And there was a book a few years ago, I believe Kurt Busiek wrote. Kurt Busiek or Bill Willingham, I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the book now. It was published by Dynamite, who used to have the Burroughs license. And it was every character. Like, Tarzan has a huge supporting cast, and he eventually has a son, Korak, who becomes the star of his own stories. And so all the Tarzan characters and all the John Carter characters, which there's tons and tons and tons, and then they all went on one big adventure, and I was like, holy shit, I had no idea there were this many characters in the Burroughs verse. Not to be confused with the William Burroughs verse, where they're all just kind of on heroin the whole time. Folks, that's a joke for the English majors out there. Well, the English majors without a sense of humor, anyway. Also this week, I don't know if I've mentioned the death of Superman. This is the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman. Kids gather around. Granddad's going to tell you about how it was collecting comic books in the early 90s. So yeah, 30 years ago, they decided they were going to kill Superman. And when that was announced, to fandom, we all kind of just went, yeah, all right. Because especially at that time, I mean, it's always been the case that characters in superhero comics die and come back all the time. It used to be sometimes they would kill him and keep him dead. And that was honestly more surprising. People were more surprised that they never brought Gwen Stacy back, or that they took fucking 60 years to bring Bucky back. They've never brought Uncle Ben back in any kind of real way. They've had stories with those characters since they've died, but not the same as, bringing them back from the dead. And with Superman, especially, I think that's why in fandom it made barely a ripple. Because we were like, yeah, you're going to kill him, but obviously you're going to bring him back immediately. Because not only does that always happen, but, I mean, the X-Men died. Jean Grey especially died. She did take a while to come back. But fans on a whole were like, yeah, sure, you'll kill him as you often do, but then you'll bring him back. Because not only is that how it's done, but he's your flagship character, for fuck's sake. He's the first superhero. You can't kill him for good. And then as I remember it, I was in the 10th grade, mind you, but as I remember it, some wire picked it up, API or somebody, and it became a huge story all of a sudden. Because all the normies out in the outside world, they're going to kill Superman? And they were primed for it because they had killed Robin just a few years earlier. That was actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that was kind of the first. And then the year after the death of Superman, they broke Batman's back and put him out of commission for a while too. So it very quickly, the death of Superman became a huge event, and DC, very media savvy, like rolled with it, and they oh boy, what a circus. And this was right around when I was only just starting to read DC Comics, because Chuck Dixon would write for him, and I was like, oh, I like him enough that I'll break my DC quarantine. And I was like, oh, these are good superhero comics. I mean, they're all the same shit. To be one or the other exclusively has never made any sense to me. Unless you're in the 6th grade. It's the only time that would make sense. But I was just kind of getting into it. when this all went down, and boy, they pulled out all the stops. They first of all they built up Doomsday, who was the character who killed him. No origin. He just punches his way out of a. It could be a daycare for all we know. All we ever see is his fist pounding into a wall. He escapes. The Justice League try to stop him. He fucks them up really well. And then it all comes down to him and Superman in Metropolis. And with the final, so this is over 8 or 9 issues. And then in Superman number 75, Superman Volume 2, number 75, is the big final fight. They beat each other to death. And then they ceased printing or publishing all 4 Superman titles: Action Comics Superman, Superman Man of Steel, and The Adventures of Superman. All done. They put out a bunch of like a fake Time magazine about the death of Superman. There was a Team Luthor. There was a storyline at the time where Lex Luthor Jr. was now running LexCorp, except it was really Lex the whole time. They couldn't tell because he had a big flowing mane of red hair. It's so stupid. He was also dating Supergirl, if I remember correctly. And then they weren't just going to bring him back. They had a whole run up to that. So then you had the Reign of the Superman, which I don't know if they're going to do an anniversary special of that. So I'm just going to skip to where they did finally bring him back. 30 years later, they have this tribute written in part by Dan Jurgens, written and drawn by Dan Jurgens, who I believe wrote and drew Superman 75. Let me put my reading spectacles on. Ordway and Gromit. Yeah, Brett Breed. These are all Superman creative teams from the 80s. Louise Simonson and John Bogdanovich, Roger Stern and Butch Geese, where guys have never known. Jerry Ordway and Tom Grummett, and then Jurgens doing story and pencils, with Breeding doing the inks. And I think, like, I haven't, this is really $11 for this maybe 80-page book. Yeah, that's kind of a ripoff. But I mean, as I've mentioned more than once, and as I'll mention with my next pick, nostalgia is the order of the day for funny books, and that's never not been the case. Well, maybe the very first, before people could be nostalgic for superhero comics, but now it's just a given. And that, I mean, when you think about it, even though there's all these superhero comics coming out today that aren't the same as when I was a kid, it's all the same bullshit. But if you're going to package it just like it was when I was in the 10th grade, then I'm going to buy it because I'm a sucker. But you already knew that. Also this week, and this is my pick for the store also, this is X-Men Legends number 4, X-Men Legends Volume 2 number 4. Written by Ann Nocenti, who is the co-creator, I believe, with Art Adams of this character. This is Longshot. Longshot is not technically a mutant. He's from a different dimension. This is Mojo back here. And the Mojo verse is everything revolves around television. Everything in the Mojo verse was like Mojo's this big fat dictator basically, and everything is for ratings and it's very very Black Mirror before Black Mirror, if you follow me. But I loved it, and Longshot became a favorite of mine just because he seemed cool. I didn't know that how stupid a mullet was yet, and he dressed cool. Like, he looked like a new waver, which when I was 11, I didn't know any better. I thought In Excess was cool back. So what do I know? When I was in the 7th grade, I still wore Converse All-Stars, which I would not give up until I was in my 40s. And on the toe of my left Converse, it said Wolverine Rules! ! And on the right one, it said Longshot Rules! ! They were my 2 favorite characters. And this series in general, which I think I've mentioned before, but if not, I guess I'll just do it again. There was I think this all started with Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont longtime X-Men writer, generally considered by those who give a shit to be, you know, the X-Men writer, essentially. He didn't create them, but he basically did. And he wrote the X-Men for 15 years, I want to say. Somewhere in the neighborhood, maybe even closer to 20. He started writing in the late 70s when he was just a 20-year-old, for Christ's sake. 21, maybe. And he quit in 1991. His final arc was the opening arc to the adjectiveless X-Men title, which was only the second X-Men title. There was a Uncanny X-Men, was the original, which had started in the 60s, had ceased in the 70s, and then restarted in the late 70s, and then was a huge phenomenon, largely due to Chris Claremont. He walked away in the early 90s, and I think he just kind of retired. He wrote a few novels, Final Flight, which I still haven't read, even though my best friend from 7th grade, James Cotton, gave me a copy, which I still have, I just haven't read. And then you fast forward to the late 90s, early aughts, and it was like Claremont wanted to write the X-Men again, but he didn't want to write current continuity X-Men. He wanted to just pick up where he had left off, and Marvel said, yes, please. Because it was guaranteed that a bunch of dorks would buy it. Now, personally, as much as I love Claremont, and I do personally and professionally, what else? Professionally, I give Claremont all the credit for the X-Men. I think the X-Men would not be the franchise it is today without Chris Claremont, even though he wasn't the creator. But I don't like his writing anymore. It's entirely too verbose. Listen, and if anyone would know verbose, it's just way too talky. It's not even talky though. It's all captions. That's the thing as an adult that I feel I've kind of lost. Like as a kid, I would read every word of every panel. Like I soaked it all in, and now I've got shit to do, so I can't do that. But also, it's just kind of, it was bad storytelling then. It's kind of still is. You don't need that much exposition, and perhaps I'm a little too postmodern or post-postmodern, but yeah, shut the fuck up, Chris. Let the actions but that's the thing is if people want Chris Claremont, they want Chris Claremont. I just don't really want Chris Claremont. But they gave it to him. They said X-Men Forever by Chris Claremont. I think even Salvador LaRocca drew it early on. That would have been a pretty early gig for him too. I don't know why I'm thinking it's LaRocca, but maybe it's a more recent thing. And then ever since then, it's kind of been a free for all in that way. Like they would let Jim Starlin write Thanos and other cosmic stories. His stuff was still in continuity, but he never really referred to any of it in his stuff. He was like, I'm just doing the Thanos stuff. I don't really give a shit what the hell else is going on. But this is like the first rotating book that they've done like this. So they did, like, the previous arc was Roy Thomas writing it. I don't remember who was drawing it. That was when Roy Thomas was writing X-Men, is one of my least favorite X-Men eras. But they did one with the Simonsons went back to X Factor, which they did in the 80s. What else? I want to say they even gave Claremont an arc on this shit, but I really can't remember. Oh, I think they gave Peter David. Peter David wrote X Factor after the Simonsons, and it was a much different book, but they gave him that. Great stuff. I love Peter David's X Factor. And so this is Ann Nocenti writing Longshot, and this is a Giuseppe Camuncoli cover, which I only just realized while I was sitting here earlier talking to my son, boring him to death with Saturday Night Live history. But yeah, Camuncoli is still one of my favorite artists working today, if not the absolute favorite artist of mine. So, brought to you by the 7th grade. Thanks, everybody. Excuse me while I get the sign here. That was Picks of the Week. And that was Picks of last week. You see, I drink highly caffeinated coffee. I drink Death Wish coffee, not an ad, but I will. It's delicious. And I haven't noticed any effects from the Kevin. So embarrassed when I try to act. Okay, last week, here's some stuff that I read. Hell to Pay #1 by the great Charles Soule with the great Will Sliney. This is very fun. Same of the ones. I can't really... These are both great. I'm going to keep buying them. But to be honest with you, boy, I feel like the year 2022 has been not great for comics or movies. There have been some pretty good comics that came out this year and a couple pretty good movies. But for the most part, when I look back on... And actually, I haven't watched any of these from this year in a while, so maybe there's stuff I'm just completely forgetting about. But yeah, I just don't have much to add. Plus, I also read these a week ago, so I don't remember very much. But yeah, like I was telling you last week, this is a story about every chosen one, every person who's ever been told they were the chosen one for whatever reason. They all have to come together to fight the actual chosen one. It's hard to explain, but if you read it, you know what I mean. And Hell to Pay, this is good. This is like this married couple, and essentially they go into heavy student loan debt at wizard school. It's more or less what it is. So that's what it is. It's a metaphor for student loans and student loan forgiveness. And if you don't, then you're the devil. Not that difficult. And this is also what I read this week. Quick Stops #1. I hope there's more of this, but like I was saying last week, I think the Skewniverse stuff, the Kevin Smith stuff, that all takes place. It's all like the same world. Is my favorite stuff. But sometimes he writes it, and I know they're his characters, but it just doesn't ring true. Like, so this issue concerns what's his name? Holden. What's Holden's last name? I can't remember. Holden McNeil, who was Ben Affleck's character in the film Chasing Amy. And in this issue, we see him today in the present being interviewed by Alyssa, who was played by Kevin Smith's girlfriend at the time, whose name eludes me. She's got 3 names, and I cannot remember them now. I shouldn't just call her Kevin Smith's girlfriend, because I knew her as an actress before he started dating her. Joey Lauren Adams. And so they've made up over the years, and now Holden is a more famous comic book creator, and he's telling a story at panel about meeting Jay and Silent Bob and making them into as if you'll recall from the 1997 film Chasing Amy. Holden and McNeil and Banky, I remember Banky's last name either, created a comic called Blunt Man and Chronic featuring Jay and Silent Bob. There was one thing in particular though that Holden says, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like something he would say. But this is honestly, I remember this as I was reading it. That has happened. Like the Clerks comics, I think he nails it. And I think that's probably because Clerks is his best film, like on a whole. I like Mallrats a little bit more, but I think Clerks is his best stuff. Clerks 2 holds up. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back does not. Jay and Silent Bob Reboot is awful. But when he does the Clerks characters, so those Clerks comics, to me, were perfect. I was like, I could 1,000,000% see these stories in the movie. With the other characters, I don't know. I don't think he nails it. And it's so stupid because they're his own characters. So, I mean, why wouldn't he? I mean, who the, you know what I mean? Like, if he's writing them, that's what they're doing. But, like I might have mentioned, I am a postmodernist, and so therefore, the death of the author. I don't give a shit what Kevin Smith says or does. If he writes these characters and I don't buy it, then I'm not buying it. Shouldn't have that third cup of coffee. I don't want to. I don't know. Maybe that's the thing. I try to be positive on here, which is probably the only aspect of my life in which I am. I don't like shitting on things. I don't like shitting on comics, especially. And I'm not trying to shit on these books. I'm not trying to damn them with faint praise either. I don't know. It just feels like as the year draws to a close, everybody's just kind of like phoning it in a little bit, and eh, no big deal. I've been watching sitcoms all day, and frankly, I kind of want to just do that anyway. But yeah, I'm gonna be house sitting starting tomorrow, so I'm not gonna get much more of these comics read. But I will see you next week from our Long Beach studios. Thank you. Won't you? Thank you.